Apple gave us the iPhone 17 with a brand new 48 megapixel sensor for the 100mm camera, making it the first iPhone with 48 megapixels on all three cameras. And photographers love the results. But is it just as good for filmmakers? The answer is not that simple. And the new 200mm lens, let's just say it looks way better on paper than in practice. In this episode, I'll compare the iPhone 16 and 17 tele lenses across different ISOs and codecs, and I'll show you real test results of the new 48 megapixel sensor so you understand why sometimes the same camera can look great while other times it can look really bad, and how choosing the right settings can fix most of these issues I found. And finally, I'll help you decide whether upgrading to the new iPhone 17 is really worth it for you as a filmmaker, or waiting for the 18 might be the better choice. Let's dive in.
Before we begin, a quick warning. I'm gonna get pretty technical sometimes, so if you're not into nerdy camera testing, you can skip it and just trust me when I say the new 100mm is only good in a few cases, but pretty bad in many others, especially when it's set to 200mm. And your choice of settings is what decides which one you get. So I advise you stick around till the end, and I'll make sure to make it super simple for everyone. Let's start with the list of upgrades and try to understand each one of them, which will explain why we're getting all these good and bad results once you see them. First upgrade. We have a new camera sensor with a 100mm lens that virtually doubles as a 200mm. More on that later. Second, we have the massive upgrade from 12 megapixels on the iPhone 16 to 48 megapixels on the 17, making it the first iPhone with all 48 megapixel cameras. So the tele lens is finally a member of the Fusion Camera Club. That's Apple slang for saying the sensor can function in two modes. To get a bit nerdy and use more familiar filmmaking terms, if that's the 48 megapixel sensor, also known as 8K, first mode is a full readout that oversamples this 8K image into a smaller 4K. It's a simple trick cameras use to improve the overall image quality. Second is the windowed mode. That's when the sensor only activates a 4K window inside the 8K. We also call it a sensor crop or a digital zoom. It's quote-unquote digital just because it just doesn't have any of the optical qualities of a 200mm lens on a full frame. But this windowed mode doesn't enjoy any of the advantages of the oversampled image, and it has a much bigger problem that you'll see in the third and last upgrade. That's when Apple said that the iPhone 17
features a sensor that is 56% larger than the previous generation.
Which is true on paper, but misleading in practice. Have a look at the sensor specs from both the 16th and 17th keynotes. The 16th has 1 pixel size, and the 17th has 2 pixel sizes, one for each mode. But notice how the first says quad pixel, the second only says pixel. That's where we have the first good and bad news. Let me explain. So the good news, and based on their numbers, the iPhone 17's 8K quad pixel mode, which oversamples the final 4K image, is indeed 56% bigger than the iPhone 16's pixels. Bigger usually means better image quality, less noise, less moire, and so on. But the misleading part is that quad pixel means that this pixel is actually made of 4 smaller pixels binned together to act as one big pixel, which is still okay as long as you're still on this 100mm oversampled mode. But it's not okay once you switch to 200mm 4K windowed mode. There's no binning anymore, so each one of these small pixels acts alone, and this single pixel is actually 61% smaller than the ones on the iPhone 16. And that could explain why the iPhone 16 consistently gave me a much better image compared to the 200mm mode on the 17. Let me show you. So in my first test, I started with the 120mm on the iPhone 16, then moved back a bit to match the exact framing with the iPhone 17 on the 200mm. I matched the composition by only changing my distance to the subject. This way the subject takes up the same area on the sensor, and it becomes a fair image quality comparison. I used a dotted line to remind you that the camera is windowing the 8K sensor to give us a tighter field of view crop in native 4K. I then switched to RAW, which uses the full sensor and doesn't give you a 200mm option, then manually cropped the image myself to match the composition from the 200mm. This will technically drop the resolution to 2.1K, but this will solve a major flaw I discovered in the 200mm that I'll show you later. And finally, I stayed at 100mm and physically moved closer to match the framing. This setup will use the full 8K sensor, then oversample it to 4K. So technically, this should be the setup that'll give us the best results of the three. For consistency, I shot everything with the Blackmagic camera app in both ProRes 422 and RAW. I have a whole episode that explains why ProRes would be the better choice for these tests over H.265. I'm also working on another episode to talk about RAW on the iPhone, so stay tuned for that. Finally, everything was shot in Apple Log and converted to Rec 709 in Final Cut Pro. All these tests took over 200 gigs of space, and we all know how this can easily get pretty annoying to manage over time, So as a content creator, don't you just wish to store all your terabytes of content in one massive and super fast cloud service without committing to any pricey monthly subscriptions? This new Ugreen NAS could be your answer. NAS, or Network Attached Storage, is basically your personal cloud storage that you own and control from your home or studio. It's a couple of hard drives that live in this enclosure that's super easy to set up via NFC with your phone and connects to your local network to store and back up all your data. And just like all cloud services, you can access all your files from anywhere in the world and from any device, whether it's Mac, Windows, Android, or iOS. NAS is a very affordable expansion solution to your existing cloud storage without the monthly subscription. I mean, my monthly $20 2TB Google Drive plan is just not enough for a week's worth of shoots. And I'm definitely not paying $250 per month for 30 terabytes when I can just pay $800 once for my own 32 terabyte plan that lasts a lifetime. I can also link it to my Google Drive to keep it all in one place and still be able to expand it later to 60 terabytes if I run out of space. Also, at speeds reaching up to 125 megabytes per second, it's a lot faster in transfer speeds than any cloud service out there. I was really impressed how in my test, Ugreen NAS handled a 5 GB upload at more than 7 times Google Drive speed. It also offers many smart storage solutions like syncing up your files to keep all your work and backup files updated, or even backing up and restoring anything, whether it's your whole computer or a specific folder. You can also secure all your sensitive work in a password-protected folder. And finally, it has an AI album feature that intelligently identifies and classifies people and locations by organizing them into smart folders. There's a lot more entertainment features than I have time to cover, so I'll let you have fun discovering all of them when you get yours with a 15% discount from the links below. Thanks again Ugreen for sponsoring this episode. Let's go back to our tests. Starting with ISO 800, this is the iPhone 16 120mm lens, and the same frame with the 17 on the 200mm lens. On a 4K screen, you'll actually notice a bit of softness on the 17. Going closer, you can see how the 16 has a lot more details in the shoulder lines. Also here you can clearly see more definition on the rings still on the iPhone 16. It's a bit noisier though, but honestly that's better than the highly denoised 17 image. That's because I can denoise the 16 and maintain all details, while the denoiser on the 17 didn't really do anything since all details are lost already. That's why I went ahead to shoot in RAW, since RAW doesn't apply any denoising and I can just add it myself in post. Again, RAW only shoots in 100mm, so I had to crop it in post and end up with a 2.1K image. This drop in resolution explains the pixelation you'll see around fine details. So it seems shooting in RAW will prevent the iPhone from this excessive denoising that sacrifices all the details in the image, which makes this a pretty tough choice. Do you want a higher resolution with less details in ProRes, or lower resolution with more details in RAW? Or just go backwards and shoot with the older iPhone 16. If we compare all three together, it's clear the iPhone 16 looks better than both options on the 17. As for the final test, I physically moved the phone closer and shot the same frame with the 100mm lens. And that's where I saw a massive improvement compared to everything we shot from the 17 so far. Now let's compare it to the 16. And I can say the 17 looks a lot better. It has great details and a lot less noise. Even when I denoise the 16, the 17 still looks better. Remember, to get this massive improvement in image quality, I had to physically move closer to the subject with the 100mm on the 17 to match the field of view of the 120mm from the 16. And it looks this much better because it's an oversampled image from the 8K sensor, while the 16 is a native 4K. So the conclusion from this first test round is, if you have the choice to frame your shot by getting closer to it, then I suggest you move closer and shoot at 100mm instead of switching to the 200mm and staying in place. But what if the subject is far enough into infinity and you can't physically move closer? That's where the second test comes in. So I shot a bunch of outdoor tests with both iPhones to see if iPhone 16 owners are really missing out on the 200mm digital zoom lens. To understand the technical differences, this is the 200mm from the 17, which we already know is a 2x crop or window from the 100mm and is natively 4K. And this is the 120mm from the iPhone 16, also natively 4K, but the field of view is a bit wider than the 200mm, so I'll have to crop it to match the 200, which will result in a 2.2K image. You'd think that's probably setting the 16 for failure already, but comparing both, I was really surprised at how they looked very close to each other, even when pixel peeping. iPhone 17's higher resolution has slightly better detail that you won't notice unless you're watching this in 4K and really paying attention, but I'm still not a fan of the overly denoised, mushy look of the 17, while the 16 has more noise that I can easily remove in post and make it look the same if not even better than the 17. So I'm not sure if that's considered a win for the iPhone 17 or not. Not to waste your time, but my conclusion from this test is that iPhone 16 users won't really be missing out on the 200mm fun on the 17. You can just crop into your 120mm camera, and with a bit of denoising, you'll get a 2.2K image that's almost identical, if not even better, than the 17's 200mm overly denoised 4K camera. In all cases, in such perfect lighting and low ISO setting, both cameras are expected to perform well, so I'm going to move ahead to stress test them in a high ISO setting and see which one breaks first. And I'm afraid to say this is the last time you're going to see it looking this good. My method was to shoot the same scene from the same distance. Of course, the 120mm on the 16 will look tighter than the 100mm. I also shot in RAW on the 17, which turned to be a lifesaver. I then cropped both to match the 120mm field of view from the 16 to check if the new camera sensor can get same or better results despite the crop. Then finally I shot at 200mm, which we know is a windowed 4K mode from the 8K sensor. Then took a copy of the 120mm and cropped it to 2.2K to match the field of view of the 200mm. That's once again to see if we can just crop the 120mm on the iPhone 16 to match the 200mm from 17 and get decent results like last time, or whether the iPhone 17's new 8K sensor will prove to be a worthy upgrade in such high ISO setting. Starting with ISO 800, this is the 120mm, and this is the 100mm from the iPhone 17 that's cropped to match the 16. Once again, it's clear that despite the slight crop, the 100mm on the 17 offers better detail and higher overall image quality than the iPhone 16's 120mm. Now going for the 200mm on the 17, and this is the same 120mm from the 16 that's cropped to match. You can clearly see there's a blue tint in the shadows of the iPhone 17. And that's the first red flag in the 200mm, while the 16 doesn't suffer from any of that. And even if I compare the 200 to the 100mm, that's the same sensor and lens the 200 cropped its image from, you can see the 100mm colors are pretty clean. Jumping to ISO 1600 and comparing the 120mm fields of view. But first, let me say this up front. Anything above ISO 800 is a danger zone for all shadows and midtones, so use it with caution and at your own risk. Seems like the same blue tinted shadows is now creeping into the 100mm as well. But the good news is that despite this blue tint, it's obvious how the 100mm on the iPhone 17 looks a lot less noisy than the iPhone 16's 120mm. That's because the noise grain size on the 16 is so much bigger than on the 17 that it destroyed all the fine details. Also, we already know the 17 is heavily denoising its footage internally. So if it just wasn't for that blue tint, the 100mm on the 17 would have been declared the winner. And if we jump to the 200mm camera on the 17, the blue tint turns into a color wash that totally destroys the image. While we already saw how the iPhone 16 doesn't have any color issues whatsoever, it just suffers from a very high noise level, as you can see. Apple obviously messed this one up so badly that somehow the iPhone 16 cropped down to 2.2K to match the 200mm field of view, and with some denoising applied to it, can look a lot better and way more usable than Apple's new 200mm feature they keep bragging about. And that's when ProRes RAW comes to the rescue. You know that RAW shoots in 4.2K, so if I crop into it to match the 200, I'll get 2.1K, which makes it fair to compare it to the iPhone 16's virtual 200mm that's a 2.2K crop from the 4K sensor. So it seems RAW got rid of the blue tint and gave us slightly sharper detail, as you can see in the shoulders. But we still have some annoying colored noise that I can easily fix with some denoising. So now we have a 2.1K cropped image from RAW that's cleaner, sharper, and more color accurate than the 4K image from the 200mm mode, which is practically unusable because of the blue tint and the excessive internal denoising that ripped out all the details. Don't forget that both images are shot on the same phone and on the same sensor. And it's funny how this 2.1K RAW looks a lot better now than the iPhone 16's 2.2K cropped image, the same one that just beat the iPhone 17's ProRes 422 version just a second ago. But the final boss of ISO 3200 is the one that will bring the iPhone 17 to the ground. Let's start with the 100mm on the iPhone 17 after cropping it to match the 120 on the 16. We've got worse blue cast that's now in both shadows and midtones. It's so strong that even RAW couldn't handle it, but at least it brought back a lot more details along with a lot of noise. Something I can improve a bit with some denoising. But it's not surprising anymore that the iPhone 16 retained very decent colors with no blue tints whatsoever, but again suffers from a massive amount of noise and a total loss of details. But after some denoising, I feel it revealed a similar amount of detail to the 17, and it's a lot more usable now than the blue washed iPhone 17 footage. So that's yet another loss for the 17 against the 16. Now the 200mm is the one that put the last nail in the iPhone 17's new sensor's coffin. I mean, there's nothing I can say other than just compare this to the cropped iPhone 16 image and let you fill the blanks. This looks more like a very bad joke Apple is pulling on us. Meanwhile, the cropped iPhone 16 image can be cleaned up a bit and turned into a way more usable option that knocks the iPhone 17's image out of the water. So here's the bottom line. The good news is that the iPhone 17's new 100mm sensor offers a good improvement step over the iPhone 16's 120mm sensor, but the 200mm looks almost identical to the iPhone 16's quality. That's mainly because both the 100 and 200mm on the 17 suffer from strong internal denoising that smudges fine details, which you can counter by shooting in RAW. While the iPhone 16 has a manageable amount of internal denoising that can recover more details with some denoising at high ISO settings. But the bad news is the 100mm breaks down above ISO 800 with this weird blue wash, so shoot in RAW to get rid of it and get more accurate colors along with some more details. But RAW also breaks down above ISO 1600, so don't get too excited about it either. As for the 200mm, it's pretty unusable above ISO 800, while the iPhone 16 doesn't suffer from any of that across all ISO levels. So as a filmmaker, is it worth upgrading from the iPhone 16 to the iPhone 17? Not really. The 200mm was a bit of a disappointment, and the 100mm improved quality isn't enough on its own to justify it. RAW is the one thing that makes the 17 more tempting. I already showed you some of the reasons here, and I'll explain a lot more in another dedicated episode about RAW that I'll link here once it's out. For photography though, that's where the 17 actually makes a lot more sense. I didn't cover it here, but I've seen a lot of videos showing how this sensor upgrade was aimed more at photos than at video.
With that said, I really hope the iPhone 18 will bring the focus back to the video-centric features, maybe add RAW to the 200mm and fix this embarrassing blue tint we saw. But most of all, we need consistent image quality across all cameras. Ideally, they should all use the same sensor as what they call the 24mm main camera. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.